1st of September 1939, Hitler's Nazi Germany invaded Poland, marking the beginning of the Second World War. Britain and France declared war on Germany 2 days later. The war would go on for 6 years, claiming an estimated 60 million people's lives. Putting up resistance to the Axis were the Allies, which consisted of France, the Soviet Union, China, United States, Britain, and its empire.
When war was declared by the British Empire on Germany in September 1939, the Dominions, free, self-governing nations, simultaneously announced their entry into the struggle. It was with no feeling of obligation that these nations declared war. Canada didn't hesitate to turn her great resources over to war production. Australia and New Zealand, then at such vast distances from the scene of combat, were free countries with the choice of participation or neutrality. South Africa, with its own special problems at home, willingly sacrificed neutrality at a time when it needed courage and conviction to support a war.
As a result of the bloody history which involved the invading and seizing of foreign lands, Britain had many countries under its rule known collectively as the British Empire. Many of the Caribbean islands were part of the British Empire. So, how did the war affect people in this region?
I was a child then. I'd started school in 1939. And in the mornings and in the evenings, it was a ritual that the teacher would read the newspaper and say what was happening. She spoke of war, but at 6 years, war didn't mean much to me. I knew it was fighting, and I was scared of fighting because I didn't like it.
The main things I can remember about the World War II period is when I was in Greenwich Town at the time, and I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I can remember the days when they used to call it blackouts, which means you had to turn off all lights. All lights had to go. You couldn't have a candle on or anything. Once the siren went off, you had to turn, and they had wardens going around to enforce it.
Fishermen used to complain many times, not complain, make statement that they've seen submarines in big sea outside the harbour when they go fishing. What truth is, we little boy couldn't convert it, but Jamaica was on high alert because that was within the era where submarines to get the convoy coming to England.
People were concerned when they hear an aeroplane that probably it might be the Germans coming and things, so they're always on the lookout, but not that they have any place to go to hide or such, but they were concerned and they look out for things like that.
They would say that they need material to make guns to fight the war. And because it was England and we were orientated to think of England as the mother country and to honor it, we all went home and we would ask for a piece of broken cooking pot, because we used to cook in cooking pots, and broken irons. And many children would take the parents' good irons and take them to school, and they're looking for the iron to iron, and they would have to come back, go out school, go and tell the teacher, send my iron back.
Now I'm going to ask Flying Officer Ulrich Cross to speak for West Indians in the services. Ulrich is a navigator in one of our own bomber squadrons.
Well, it's a job to know where to start. There are so many of us doing so many different things. In the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, in Air Sea Rescue and the Marines, in the Wrens, the ATS, the WAF, and the nursing services. If I could navigate you on a magic carpet, we'd find West Indians at their stations all over the country, and in lots of other places which I'm not allowed to mention.
Britain and its ally needed large armies to withstand the threat of being conquered by the Axis, and enlisted the help of people from its empire. But would people who have been enslaved, conquered, and ruled by the British Empire for over 400 years volunteer to fight to defend Britain.
Having had the historical treatment as slaves, having been worked often to death, having been treated as inferiors, they still volunteered. And it's something that gives you pause for thought.
They were massively ambitious, massively talented. Some of them were joining simply for adventure. Some were joining because even though they weren't joining to defend the empire, they were joining to defend the black parts of it. No, they were defending the bad against the worst.
I think a lot of the men from Jamaica were in the RAF. I can't remember any that was army, or at least from where I came from. It was the RAF.
6,000 men and women from the Caribbean volunteered to fight with the RAF against Hitler and the Axis, one being Jamaican-born Mr. Oswald George Powell.
It's very difficult to say what made me decide. But like thousands of young men like myself, you adventurous, rebellious, and so on. I was never employed in Jamaica. I was still at college. And so I have no responsibility. I did not have a girlfriend as such, and I have no financial responsibility. I was still with my parents and my siblings and other relatives. So when I decided to join, I left nothing behind.
I was sailing in ships, in Norwegian ships before the war, you know, as a young chap. Because when I left school, I was supposed to study accountancy. And I started to study and I got a bit bored sitting down. And I got a job in this Norwegian company and went to sea. And I sailed with them, didn't pay me very much. But I learned a lot because the Norwegians are very thorough people. And when the war was declared, I came over to England with another friend from Jamaica, and I attended nautical college and then got started in the ships.
I was a young lad still at school. I was in sixth form, and it's ridiculing a friend who had recently left school started the ball rolling because he was coming up the street and we said, I'll just use him, call it John. We said, hello, John. We thought you'd gone and joined the Air Force because at the time they were recruiting. So he said, oh, they were giving me algebra and XY this to, and I didn't understand it, so I didn't pass. So we were ridiculing him. So we decided, a gang of us decided to go and have a look what this is all about. And that's how it was a recruiting office. You had to have a test first before you even get the application form.
Even when I was a boy, I, was respected the British. I was proud to be British in Jamaica because my stepfather was English and he was a marvelous man.
A lot of them feel that they were patriotic and they were doing something for king and country. But people like myself never thought about that. It's just, you went in it because I think about your youth, rebellious, not in the sense of creating trouble, but you want something different.
It seems exciting because my best friends were along with me. There was about 6 or 8 of us from the same school in the same class. The sad part of it was that we didn't stay together.
You join because some of your friends has joined, and also curiosity.
Let me tell you a bit more about how one or two of us spend our time. The Spitfire Fund started in the West Indies, and attached to one of our own fighter squadrons is Sergeant Pilot Jimmy Hyde, who himself comes from Trinidad. He is reporting back from an operational flight. Hardly any of us had experience of flying before the war. The air routes between the islands were mainly run by the Americans. when peace comes, the increase in air transport should mean a new career for many of us who have now learned the job.
Not everybody can get into the RAF. And I'm very biased, but I have to say, to get into the Royal Air Force, you have to be that, and they were. They overcame the hurdles of their culture and their colour, the prejudice that was against them, even though the policy was notionally open, and they still got through.
The standard was very, very high, and these were men that were either have passed first and second and taken third year, or past third year and doing teaching.
So fun me soldier man, fun me soldier man, fun me soldier man, Lord, oh girl, you character gone.
Radar operator is to plot the flight of aircraft and to give directions or instructions where necessary. For example, if a set of enemy bombers were coming in to bomb some part of Britain, well, you'd pick them up on the radar screen. For example, it's the Japanese that invented it, the radar system, right? Then you'd plot the course and you direct your pilot, fighter pilot, where it is, so that the fighter pilot can attack and shoot it down. So, and also, is to guide flights from one destination to the other. So the radar is still used, it's used in civilian system, right? And that is the whole role of a radar.
I was posted away to a bomb unit where they get the bombs ready for the Lancaster bombers. But my role wasn't to do it because they had armorers who do that job. I was what they call trained as a fireman, which this place blew up completely some months before, so it looked like we were replacement.
I went to college, first of all nautical college, to get qualifications for the jobs in British ships, and then eventually, I got established in the British Merchant Navy and worked my way up to purser, ship's purser, responsible for all the accounts and the ship's crew's welfare and so on.
Innumerable men and women from the Caribbean were drafted in to fight for Britain via the RAF, the Royal Navy, the British Army. But what about African countries that were still under British rule? Did England also encourage recruits from these countries to help to defend its ally?
In 1945, there were 60 chaps from West Africa serving. That's Nigerians, people from the Gambia, Ghana, serving in the RAF. They come over. It's rather a small number given the huge populations. And there were very large numbers of, I think it's over 300,000 Africans fought in the British Army, particularly in Burma, where they did a very good job.
In the autumn of 1944, the Empire and Allied armies launched the final campaign to destroy the Japanese land forces in Burma. The 81st West African Division had already fought the Japs in 1943, and the arrival of the 82nd Division in 1944 meant double trouble for the enemy. These aerial pictures give some idea of the jungle hills and valleys that faced the attacking forces, but their spirits were high as they awaited their task. The order to move came to the West Africans, who were assigned the important job of clearing the Caladan Valley.
In mid-1945, Hitler, who had pledged to stay in Berlin until last day, committed suicide in his bunker. War may have been officially over, but the lives of millions of people across the globe had been shattered. What was life like for black soldiers now that the war was over? Did they return to their countries of origin?
Boys from Miss Thompson's school and other schools, they were recruited and sent to England on the premise that after the war they would be granted so much land. Unfortunately, don't trust politicians. When those same men came back, they didn't get any land, and if they did get the land, it was a piece of land that goat wouldn't climb up to. So that was one disappointment.
After the wars, where in a sense the story becomes really interesting in terms of the contribution of forces personnel to life in these islands, because the official story of the black presence begins, the official story, and the incorrect one begins in the summer of 1948 when the Empire Windrush docks at Tilbury. What's often forgotten is that up to a third of the passengers who stepped off it were former servicemen.
Because a lot of us went on from the Fort City University and all these kind of things, you know what I mean? Because the opportunity was there. They brought in civilian, they call them instructors, to lecture us and to teach us, right? But of course, you could be here for 3 months and then you move somewhere for 3 months. So, you know, it wasn't, but it was such that you could do courses. Mm-hmm.
Did you do any courses?
Yeah.
Yeah, what did you do?
You see, mathematics and a few others. That's why I became a mathematician.
Okay.
After the wars ended, I got married, and I must admit it was a struggle at first to get a decent job. But having had experience in account money, I got a job with NAFI. And I think NAFI used to look after all ex-service people, you see. And I got a job in NAFI accounts, and I worked for them for 6 years.
Most of the chaps had been to college, those that had stopped on. There was a couple who had a job lined up in Miami. His parents knew somebody who knew somebody was getting a job. This person was a civil engineer, that things that they had learned. And there was I listening to them on the way back home and saying, well, what have I learned? Just to be a fireman. But I didn't want to be a fireman. So my only chance then was to come back and try to do something here, which is what I did.
These men are gaining knowledge not only in the wide field of engineering, but in the workings of the British trade union system. Also, they are getting together with English workers in the factories. And this will mean a lot during Reconstruction after the war, when plans for a new era of life in the West Indies must be put into effect.
March, march for victory, fight for land and sea and in the air, unto victory.
In Nottingham, ex-service personnel was responsible for establishing a number of black organizations. One of the first was the West Indies Caribs Cricket Club, followed by the Colonial Social and Sports Club, later to be known as a Commonwealth Citizens Association, and even later, WENA. Then there was a Black People's Freedom Movement, the Caribbean Women's Association, and the African Caribbean National Artistic Center, which everybody knows as ACNA Center. They also influenced the broader social and civic life in this city. I think the point that we need to look at is the role that ex-servicemen played in the organic development of our community in Nottingham.
Let's put it this way, 90% of all the association that formed was ex-service based. Always one of them at the beginning, root of it that started.
Without the ex-servicemen being part of our generation here and helping to formulate the structures of our society, I think that we could have been poorer.